not really religious. And then by the time he joined me in my yeshiva, by the way, I'm Rabbi Feder, I help run the JC, so sometimes you see me pop into events, but you might know Rabbi Goldstein or Rabbi Weiss better. But anyway, I go way back with a fellow named Mason Reiner in yeshiva in Queens. And I was talking to Mason a couple weeks ago. I said, how wonderful would it be if you came down and shared your story, how you became more religious, you weren't so religious, how you connected, and then shared your story, how you started a business, built up the business, successfully sold the business, and now he's sitting learning in yeshiva again, as he's either retired or semi-retired, I'm not sure. But he flew down with his wife, and we're so glad to welcome them, and he's going to share with you some of his stories and his secrets to success, both in Judaism and in the business world. So without further ado, Mason Reiner.
Thank you. I think Rabbi Feder just took the whole story. So he actually did it a lot quicker than it's probably going to take me to do it. So, first of all, thank you, Rabbi Feder, for inviting me to join you all here this evening in sunny South Florida, where it's a lot hotter than it is in Philadelphia. But we're happy to be here. My wife is here as well. So you can cross-check and fact-check anything I say with her after I'm done. No, she definitely does not. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself, what I do now, and then try to fill in a little bit of the history. And this is not really intended to be a spectator sport, so feel free to raise your hand. Try not to shout out, but at least, if you want to ask a question or anything along the way, feel free. Okay, so right now, I'm a partner in a firm called Abbott Health Ventures. We're an early stage healthcare venture capital fund. For those who may not be familiar with what venture capital is, it's basically we invest in early stage companies, early stage technology companies, and digital diagnostics, digital therapeutics, tech-enabled healthcare services. So we invest capital in the early stages of the launch, and then we go on the board of the company, help mentor the entrepreneur, and hopefully help them grow it into a large and successful business. Just give you a couple of examples of the types of companies that we invest in. If anybody's interested in healthcare, we just made an investment in a company called Encapsulate, which was spun out of UConn, University of Connecticut, where it's a lot colder. And basically what they do is they grow microtumors, what they call tumoroids, which is basically, unfortunately, if you've ever had a family member who had cancer, one of the big challenges with cancer, particularly with chemotherapy, is that the musical accompaniment to my speech? Yes. So one of the big challenges when it comes to chemotherapy is figuring out what chemotherapy will actually work. And if you get it wrong on the first try, the body develops resistance to drugs, and it can make it much more difficult to treat the cancer. So what this company does is they can take it from the needle biopsy a very, very small piece of a patient's tumor, and then they can grow hundreds of exact replicas called microtumors of that tumor that they can then test various chemotherapies on to see which one is going to be most effective for that particular patient. So it's pretty breakthrough stuff, and we're excited to be invested in that company. Another example of a company that we're invested in is a company called SurgiBox, and what they do is they basically created a mobile sterile surgical environment, so you can basically perform surgery in a sterile environment anywhere. So this has been used on the front lines of the war in Ukraine, because obviously military usage is a big application for that technology. So anyway, that gives you a little bit of a feel for the types of stuff that we invest in. Prior to joining Ambit, as Rabbi Feder alluded to, I was the founder and CEO of a company called Our Health, and we'll talk a little bit maybe more about Our Health this evening, but we were one of the largest direct primary care providers in the country. What that means, it's a fancy way of saying that we delivered primary care, virtual care, population health management to large employers across 4 states. Our largest client was the state of New Jersey, and about 500,000 people that were on the New Jersey State Health Benefits Program. I don't know if anybody's from New Jersey, but give a little shout out to New Jersey. And basically, I successfully led Our Health through the entire sort of venture life cycle, from an idea kicking around in my head all the way through to a successful exit to a strategic acquirer. And that was a pretty exciting journey. But I want to kind of take a step back and share with you a little bit about how I got to where I am today, and the journey that I've taken through life. Hopefully you'll find it at least a little bit interesting, and maybe learn something along the way, as hopefully I have. So I was born and grew up in New York, on Long Island to be more specific. We have more of a shout out to New York, probably more people from New York than New Jersey. Yeah, there we go. So kind of in what you would call, I guess, a regular suburban middle class Jewish home. We definitely weren't wealthy. You know, I had distinct memories of pretty long period of time when my father was out of work. Things were pretty tight. We were fairly active in our local conservative synagogue. By fairly active, I mean, you know, we went to synagogue more than twice a year, but not really much more than that. That was kind of where I came from Jewishly. I went to the local, public junior high school, public high school out on Long Island, from actually, Suffolk County in Huntington. If anybody knows. She was just cheering for Huntington. That's fine, no problem. Don't worry. Now, somewhere around 7th or 8th grade, which was more years ago than I probably care to admit at this point, but somewhere around 7th or 8th grade, my father started mentioning to me this thing called investment banking. I don't know if anybody here knows what investment banking is, but in 7th or 8th grade, I had this sort of like vague understanding that it meant, and kind of sounded like a cool thing that people did on Wall Street and made a lot of money doing it. My father also told me that the best top firm on Wall Street to do this thing called investment banking was Goldman Sachs, maybe a company that you've heard of, and that the best business school in the country was the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. So I know we're not in Philadelphia, we're not in Pennsylvania, but it's a good school. So therefore, at around the age of 13 or 14, for reasons which kind of remain a bit vague to me at this point, I decided that my goal in life was to be an investment banker, and I was going to be a partner at Goldman Sachs. And the way I was going to get there was I was going to go to the Wharton School. So now, sort of having decided as I started high school that I wanted to go to one of these top Ivy League schools, I of course had to do well in high school, because it's kind of hard to get into Wharton and Penn if you don't do well. So I studied hard, took a bunch of APs, did well on the SATs. I don't know if that's still a thing these days, but the SATs was a big thing back then, and was salutatory to my graduating class. Now, just so you don't think I was a total nerd, I did also play a lot of sports growing up. Played varsity soccer for a couple of years in high school. But all around, my main goal was to prepare myself to get into Wharton. So senior year came around and it was time to apply for college. I applied for one school, Wharton. Thankfully, I got accepted early decision, and so I was off to Philadelphia. Now, at Wharton, preparing for a career on Wall Street is a bit like a religion. That's kind of what you do. Wharton is focused a lot on finance. Just to tell you how stuck up they are about finance, they actually call it finance. So You have to put the right emphasis there. Anyway, so I tried to do all the right things when I was at Wharton. I was a Joseph Wharton Scholar, Benjamin Franklin Scholar. I was on the Dean's Advisory Board. I had a work-study job working for the professor who ran the Wharton Entrepreneurial Center. Tried to kind of get the right summer jobs. I spent a summer working as a management consultant in Melbourne, Australia, and I spent a summer working on Wall Street at a nice Jewish firm called Deutsche Bank, which you may have heard of. It's a big German bank. And I worked on Wall Street. I worked on this on what was called the Global Relative Value Desk. So what was that? We were trading credit derivatives. So for those who were paying attention maybe about a decade ago, those were the things that crashed the world economy back in 2008. This was before that, but it was an interesting learning experience. So, but most importantly, if you want to get a job on Wall Street, you have to have good GPA. So I studied pretty hard there also, and thankfully I did pretty well. Now, senior year rolled around, and recruiting for jobs at Wharton is a pretty intense process. It's very organized, very competitive, and sparing you all the details, it's an interesting experience. But anyway, so of course, my top target of where I wanted to go work was Goldman Sachs. So Goldman was one of the companies that came to recruit at Wharton. And it was a pretty intensive interview process. Those of you who have kind of gone through a college interview process probably have some experience with this. Multiple rounds of interviews, including traveling up to New York City to interview with the partners. And they ask you all sorts of both challenging and outside the box questions to see kind of how you think on your feet, how you react to pressure. I still remember one of the sort of outside the box questions that I got was, it was being interviewed by two Goldman bankers, and one of them says to me, he says, what if I told you right now that you and I play a game of one-on-one, and if you're able to score one basket on me, you get this job? Will you take the bet? These are the types of things they ask. If you want to know how I answered it, you can talk about it later. But it was interesting. And then at the end of the interview process, thankfully, I got an offer to be an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. Now, I want to pause for a second before telling you what happened next and rewind back to 9th grade. So in parallel to my academic journey and my pursuit of a job offer at Goldman Sachs, there was something else interesting happening in my life, something much more profound, that was really happening in parallel. So back in 9th grade, I started getting involved in an organization called USY. I don't know if anybody, raise your hand if you've ever heard of it. Okay, a few people. So USY, for those not familiar, which is probably most of the room, was the Jewish youth group for the conservative movement. So I started to get involved with that in 9th grade, started to pique my interest a little bit in Judaism. The summer after my junior year of high school, I went on something called Poland's Seminar Israel Pilgrimage, which was a 6-week summer program. Looks like we have a fellow alum back there in the back right corner. So basically what we did was we spent a little over a week in Poland, going to the various concentration camps, seeing the Jewish communities that had been destroyed in Eastern Europe, and then we spent about 5 weeks in Israel. That experience lit a bit of a fire underneath me, so I came back with a renewed interest in learning more about Judaism. I had a good friend from USY who has about the most Jewish-sounding name you'll ever hear. His name was Yehuda Buckwitz, still a good friend of mine. He's now a hotshot lawyer in New York, which is pretty funny if you ask me. But anyway, he was a good friend of mine back in high school. He came from what I guess we'd call a conservadox family, a little bit more Jewishly involved than I was. So we decided we're going to check out this local Orthodox synagogue that was in my neighborhood in Huntington. So we two high school kids walked in there, one Simchas Torah, and I met this young rabbi named Rabbi Moshe Labrie. You can sort of think of him as the Rabbi Feder of Huntington. He had started a small synagogue out there and was doing outreach. And I started to kind of develop a relationship with him and proceeded to pepper him endlessly and mercilessly with all my questions about Judaism over a number of years. But we really developed a close relationship. But I was still really quite involved with USY. So I had this interesting dichotomy going on where I was very involved. I was regional president, actually at that point, for the New York region of USY. But I was also kind of getting more interested in Orthodox Judaism. So my parents, being the good parents of conservative Jews that they were, decided, whoa, it's getting a little too interested in Orthodoxy here. Let's go send him to talk to our conservative rabbi, see if he can talk him out of this. So I went and had a meeting with the rabbi of my local conservative synagogue where I had grown up. And I'm not sure if you're going to have the same reaction to this that I did, but I'll tell you what happened, and I'll tell you my reaction to it. So he sat me down, we started chatting, very nice man, we had a good relationship, and he proceeded to tell me the following story. He said, there was this young family, a couple of young kids in the synagogue who came to me and said, the way that we would like to celebrate Shabbat is we'd like to go to the park, drive to the park with our family and have a picnic. And that's the way that we want to celebrate Shabbat. And he said to me, and I said to them, that's great, you can do that. Now, this is where maybe I'm getting a little bit politically incorrect, probably. Incorrect, right? Thank you. I went to Wharton and studied finance, not English. And so, he was telling me this story to show me, what kind of a great and sensitive and flexible rabbi he was. But I was sitting there thinking in my mind, you're making this stuff up as you go along. I mean, if there's no actual objective truth to any of this, why should I waste my time with it? So that was kind of one story that really turned me off, honestly, from conservative Judaism. This is part of the reason why I told you can't record this. What?
You're being recorded.
You're not being recorded right now.
Okay, good. Because that was part
It
of my
hasn't
deal.
been 18 minutes and 2 seconds at all.
What?
What?
All right, we'll talk about that after, because that was part of the deal with Rabbi Feder when I came down. So anyway, so that. What? Editing. Yeah.
Fix it in post.
What?
Fix it in post.
Okay. Another story that happened to me. So, like I told you, I was very involved with USY. We'd have these Shabbatons, these weekend programs. And the one Shabbos afternoon, we had a discussion group, and I was walking with one of the, I guess at that point we were kids, so one of the adult leaders of the organization, and we walked into the room where we were supposed to have this discussion group, and the lights weren't on. So I noticed, just he and I walked in before anybody else, so I noticed he looked around to see if anybody was watching, and he went and flipped on the lights. Now, maybe, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but one of the rules of Shabbos observance is you're not allowed to turn on lights on Shabbos. So I saw this, and they talked about that in this, and I saw this, and I said, if the leaders don't really believe what they're teaching, this is a total farce. So those two experiences kind of, I guess, soured me on conservative Judaism and led me much more strongly to pursue understanding, true Torah Judaism, to figure out, is there really something worth believing in? And is it true at the end of the day? Because if it's not true, then who cares? So I continued studying a lot with Rabbi Labrie. Like I said, peppering him with all these questions. And slowly but surely, he started to really convince me. By senior year, I had kind of realized how little I really knew, and that, despite my academic achievements, my Jewish learning skills were pretty rudimentary at best. So I graduated from high school a semester early, and I went to yeshiva for half a year. For those of you who may not exactly familiar with what the term yeshiva means, that's basically a place where you sit and study Judaism all day, which may not sound exciting, but actually is pretty invigorating when you really do it. So I spent half a year doing that, and I was probably, I've never done a sort of a comprehensive survey to figure out whether this is true, but I'm pretty confident that I was the only kid in history who was simultaneously regional president of USY and attending an ultra-Orthodox black hat yeshiva. It's not a very common, sort of combination. So that was very interesting, and I enjoyed that. But then high school ended, and I was off to Penn. By the time I arrived at Penn my freshman year, I was already keeping Shabbos and Kashrus, keeping kosher and keeping Shabbos. There was a pretty, actually vibrant Orthodox Jewish community at Penn at that time.
Kushner, right?
No, so when I was at Penn, Jared Kushner's half-brother was a friend of mine. And Ivanka Trump was, I think, a year or two behind me at Penn. I didn't know her there. So I'm not sure that Penn, whatever. Penn is an interesting place nowadays in terms of its views on politics. But anyway, well, that's a different topic. But at that time, Penn had a very vibrant Orthodox Jewish community, and it doesn't anymore, but it did then. And so, I really had an opportunity to, while I was there, to get involved in regular Torah study. I was able to, there was, multiple, minyanim there, Shabbos meals. It was, the Orthodox minyan Friday night at Penn at that point would probably get 200 to 300 people, which was pretty rare for a secular university. Now, I also had the good fortune, we were just, Rabbi Fenner and I were just talking about Shmuel Kamenetsky, maybe not a name that's familiar to some of you, but his son, Rav Shalom Kamenetsky, was giving actually a Talmud class at Penn at that time. So I had an opportunity to really develop a good relationship with him. And today, so I kind of went through about 2 years of Penn this way, and I still felt that my Jewish knowledge and learning skills were not really where they needed to be, and I kind of still had more catching up to do. So the first half of my junior year, I took a leave of absence for a semester. I went to Israel to study in yeshiva in Israel. Now that was a fantastic experience. I strongly recommend if anybody has an opportunity to spend any time studying in Israel, it's absolutely worth it, from as long or as short as you can do it. I met other guys from all over the world who were also kind of on this similar journey as I was. I also actually, interestingly enough, learned how to play cricket. Does anybody know what cricket is? So cricket is this really popular sport pretty much in all of the British Empire. So there were a bunch of guys from England and Scotland, and Thursday night after the cholent, they used to like to play cricket in the dining room. So I got to be a pretty mean bowler. For those who are not familiar with the cricket lingo, bowler is basically like the English version of pitching, from terms of baseball. So I spent a half a year there in Israel, and then I came back to finish my year and a half at Wharton. So now, fast forward to where we left off the story before, I'm about to graduate Wharton. I have my coveted job offer from Goldman Sachs in hand, but there's only one problem. And that is, I've changed as a person since that 14-year-old kid whose goal in life it was to be an investment banker and be a partner at Goldman Sachs. At that point, I had a lot more meaningful goals in life, including, wanting to build a marriage and a family and a home that was really centered around Judaism and Torah. And I had some real spiritual goals for my life that went beyond making money. I also still felt like I had some catching up to do when it came to my Jewish learning skills. And I really wanted to spend a full year learning in yeshiva because I never really had that chance. Professionally, like I told you, I worked for the professor who ran the Wharton Entrepreneurial Center, so along the way I had also sort of been bitten by the entrepreneurial bug and kind of liked the idea of starting companies from scratch. So I was trying to kind of weigh this all up and figure out what am I going to do, because I have a pretty big decision to make. So I decided, I'm going to ask Goldman whether I can defer my offer for a year, because that'll solve a lot of my problems. And I'll still be able to go to Goldman, but I'll go and then I'll be able to go to yeshiva for a year, and then I'll start my career on Wall Street. To my surprise, they said no. You can't defer. It's now or never. Now I was really faced with an agonizing decision. Because my whole life up to that point, which when you're my age now, it doesn't seem like that's a huge amount of your life, but at that point it does. You know, my whole life up to that point, as far as I could remember, this is what I wanted to do. And now I had that opportunity. And I had a good friend at Wharton who used to say, and he was very right, he said, investment banking is a great way for really smart, really hardworking, risk-averse people to get rich. Because basically, if you go to Goldman Sachs, you work hard and you're smart, eventually you're going to be rich. It's just kind of the way the system is designed. And I used to think that's what I wanted to do. But I was struggling. I was struggling with this decision, and the time was ticking. There was a deadline. So on the day that I had to give my decision, I remember I had a long conversation with my father, debating pluses, minuses, this, that, you know, upwards, down, what to do. Now, to my father's credit, he's not Orthodox, not Torah observant, but he understood how important that was to me, and he didn't try to dissuade me from factoring that into my decision. And at the end of that conversation, he said to me, Mason, 5 years from now, when you look back, what are you going to most regret having not done? And I thought about that, and with that, I had the clarity to make the decision. I called a recruiter from Goldman Sachs, and in a blatant act of Wharton heresy, I turned down my offer to be an investment banker. I still remember that conversation because when I told her, she was convinced she hadn't heard me right. Because nobody says no to Goldman Sachs. But I assured her that I was saying no. And then at that point, I made a deal with God. I said, through my job at the Wharton Entrepreneurial Center, I had gotten involved advising a startup company. The young lady she's actually a pretty famous, I think, fashion designer now. But she wanted me to partner with her on a startup company. And she was working on, this was like the height of the internet boom. It was really cool to start internet companies back then, you know, back in the day of Yahoo, for those who, you know, remember. And so I made a deal with God. I said, okay, I'm going to give this venture a shot. And if it fails, I'm going to go to yeshiva. That was a really bad deal to make with God. Because sure enough, 4 months later, the venture completely failed. But I had to keep my end of the bargain, so I went off to yeshiva. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, to be honest, because about a year and a half later, a matchmaker, a shadchan, who was a friend of mine in yeshiva's mother, Yehuda Mandel, Mrs. Mandel, who I'm sure you know, introduced me to a young woman who is now my wife of 23 years. She deserves a round of applause. Now, you can confirm with her that she would never have considered meeting me if I had chosen to go to Goldman Sachs. Because she was only interested in a husband who was as passionate about building a home and a family infused with Torah values as she was. So we got married, and we agreed that I would continue learning in yeshiva for 1 year. At the end of that year, we agreed to do it for another year. 1 year continued into the next, and about 7 years later, I was officially a rabbi. Now, during that time, we did have a growing family to support, so I did do some work at night. It was very fortuitous. My brother lived in Australia, so the time zones worked out that I could work at night. I worked on some very interesting startup companies in the clean tech space and the high tech space. Again, sparing those details right now. When I finished getting smicha, getting rabbinic ordination, we moved to Philadelphia, where I worked part-time in Jewish education, and ultimately started my company, Our Health, in 2013. Built it up over 8 years. I'd love to say it was smooth sailing. You know, if you've ever done a business presentation and you do your projections, it's like, yeah, everything's going to go like this, revenues, profits, everything's going to be great. That's not how real life works when you start a company. There were definitely moments of exhilaration, but there were a lot of moments of frustration and fear that it was all going to come crashing down. The CEO's chair is also a pretty lonely one, because you're at the top of the organization, but you also have really a tremendous opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. And I really tried to incorporate into my leadership skills and my leadership style a lot of the Torah ideals that I had learned in yeshiva. Just give you a few examples. First and foremost, I think it was integrity. I remember hearing for the first time many years ago in yeshiva, said, don't do anything in life that you wouldn't want published on the front page of the New York Times. That's even more true now in the social media era than it was at that time, because things can go viral real quick. But I always try to run my business with that in mind. And it's not always easy, because there's a lot of times in business when you want to cut corners, you're afraid you're going to lose that customer, you're afraid, the competition is doing something that's, that's immoral and is giving you a leg up, but it's never worth it. The other thing that I really tried to incorporate is I had a diverse team of people working for me. I mean, we had people from, low-paid medical assistants who were living literally paycheck to paycheck, not knowing how they were going to feed their kids, to very highly compensated physicians and senior executives. But they all had real struggles in life. I remember I had one of the folks on my senior leadership team. She had a daughter who was struggling immensely with eating disorders. We had a medical assistant whose ex-boyfriend showed up at the medical practice, basically with a gun looking for her. People have real challenges in life, and to lead with empathy is critical, and something that I think I was really my wife will tell you that I'm not naturally the most emotional person. Sometimes she's like, oh, that's your excited face, but learning in yeshiva really helped me develop, I think, those skills of really trying to understand people and really being able to empathize with people. And that helped me a lot as a business leader. I also always tried to just infuse the company with what we call in yeshiva parlance, simchas achayim, just a kind of a sincere joy of life. Just the fact that we're alive and we have the opportunities to do the things that we do, to really just kind of lead with that simchas achayim. In terms of sort of Shabbos and observance, there are definitely challenges that come with that. I have to be honest with you, for me, I never really had any major challenges with Shabbos observance. And in fairness, may have been partly because I was the boss. But I also had customers, I had clients and things, and I found that if you set expectations and you're clear up front, and people understand that you're a person of integrity, you have certain values that you live by, and that you're not going to compromise, they respect that. And I never really, there were times when there were big meetings, things that I just couldn't do because it was Shabbos or Yom Tov, one of the holidays, and people understood that. They respected it. And my team members who, were non-Jews, they were very supportive, and, they stepped in when they knew that I couldn't. So, after sort of a great 8-year run, I sold our health, like I said, to a large strategic acquirer. I stayed on for a bit over a year as part of the executive team. This was a much larger company. We had about 1,000 employees, 35 states. That was an exciting experience, but I didn't really want to stay too long there. So, a bit over a year, and then I took a sabbatical, I guess you would say, and went back to yeshiva. Full time. So we did that for about a little over a year. And then now, I split my day, half a day learning in yeshiva, and half my day is devoted, like I said, to investing in and mentoring startup companies in the healthcare space. As I look back, how many minutes am I up to?
13 plus like 20 because it cut out. Whatever that is, I don't know math. You're a finance guy, so you should know.
Good. Okay. All right. So, as I look back on this journey, and it's still going on, honestly, but as I look back, I see, and some of it's only with hindsight, but I honestly see literally the hand of God in both my successes and my failures. And sometimes the failures were just as important as the successes. I give you a couple examples. I alluded to the fact that I worked with my brother on starting a clean tech company in Australia. So we started this company called Axiom Energy. It was going to be one of the first and largest producers of biodiesel, which is renewable fuel, in Australia. Got off to a great start, partnered with big companies, and we were all set to list the company to be publicly traded on the Australian Stock Exchange. We had big investment bankers who raised tens of millions of dollars for us. It was fully underwritten. It was the day before we were supposed to start trading on the Australian Stock Exchange. And when that happened, I was going to be a very wealthy person. And we get a letter from the Australian Tax Authority saying that one of our side products they're about to introduce a new tax on. They haven't introduced it yet, but they're going to introduce a new tax on it. Our bankers decided that's like a material event, and we can't list the stock. And the whole IPO shot. We tried again later, but it never happened. And I realized that venture, I had made good money during that venture, but that really money was to support us while I was learning in yeshiva, full time before we moved to Philadelphia. And we had enough money to do that. And then when we didn't need that money anymore, that venture, combusted literally. Now, I'll tell you another example of the Hashgacha practice, the divine intervention. So when I started Our Health, we were this little company. We had a couple of medical offices in Pennsylvania, New Jersey. We were really struggling to get off the ground. Unbeknownst to me, if you know anything, we were talking about politics before. Was anybody from New Jersey before? No. But anybody remember Governor Chris Christie in New Jersey?
Yes.
Right? Rambunctious Republican, didn't get along with the unions very much, the public sector unions. He was the governor of New Jersey, and somehow in a must have been, nothing can explain this other than divine intervention, he and the labor unions, the large labor unions in New Jersey, decided to cooperate and start a direct primary care program for the state of New Jersey. Like, nobody had even heard of direct primary care. And they started this program for the whole state of New Jersey. And we happened to be this little company in New Jersey. We were one of the only companies that did direct primary care in New Jersey. And so we ultimately won that contract, and that was like a company-making experience. I had no role in creating that program. I had no idea that the governor and the unions were working on it. I only found out about it once it was approved, but it was the single, probably biggest ingredient in the success of my company. I'll tell you one, I'm sure there's a lot of these stories, but I kind of want to be sensitive to time here. When I sold our health, first it was toward the tail end of COVID, and had I waited to the end of COVID a year later, the market valuations for the types of companies that I sold had dropped in half. If I sold that company a year later than when I sold it, I would have made half as much money. Timing, you could call it coincidence. I think there's been so many of these as I look back on my life that, you know, there's only really one way to explain it, and that is that literally the hand of God. I have more of these stories, but if you want any more, we can always ask me later. So, while I'm still learning and growing as a person, there are some things that I've learned which I find valuable. I'm going to share them with you in the hopes that maybe you'll find them valuable also. Number one is struggles are an essential part of life. We're not put here in this world to coast. I've had some definite struggles. I've told you about a couple of them in terms of my father being out of work, my couple of the ventures that I started completely failing. We had a time period in our marriage where we had multiple children and no source of income. These were hard times. But these inevitable challenges in life can be managed much more effectively when you have the wellspring of Judaism to draw upon and a meaningful relationship with God that gives you the strength and confidence to persevere. I found that on more than one occasion, and again, you can fact check me with my wife, she's here. Number two, God did not create anybody for mediocrity. He didn't create any of you to be mediocre. You have inherent greatness within you, and your job is to really tap into that and make an impact. And the impact that you can make is really unique to you and only you. Right? Just as no two of us are exactly identical on the outside, no two of us are identical internally. I remember I once saw, there's a famous rabbi, Rav Yeruchim Lubavitz. He said, it's unfortunate if a person doesn't recognize their shortcomings. We all know people like that who unfortunately don't recognize their shortcomings. But he said it's truly tragic if you don't recognize your abilities. Right? We each have amazing abilities, and we just have to figure out A, what they are, and how to tap into them. Which kind of brings me to the next point, which is live with purpose. Don't live the life that just happens to you. Live the life that you want to live. I've tried to do that. Hopefully you've heard a little bit from my story that I hope I've had some success in doing that. But really think about what kind of life you want to lead. I'm reminded of a story. There's a Rabbi David Orlovsky. He's a really funny guy. I don't know if you ever heard of his name, if you ever heard of him. My wife was pretty close with him from her time in Israel. And I remember hearing him tell a story. After his father died, and a lot of people probably know, after somebody dies, you write a headstone, right? And some number of months after a person dies, you put up the headstone. So he was put in charge of writing the headstone for his father. Now, I don't know about you, I sometimes find it pretty depressing if you walk around the cemetery and you look at some of these headstones, and so many of them all say the exact same thing. Wife, mother, grandmother. Father, husband, grandfather. But he didn't want to just write that on his father's headstone. He wanted to actually write something that captured the essence of his father and his father's life. But it took a while, and time was dragging on. They wanted to order the headstone already and put it up. So finally, his family turns to him in frustration and says, "How long does it take to write a headstone?" And he turned to them and he said, "It takes a lifetime." And what did he mean by that? He meant, what I took away from it, I think, is yes, think about what you want them to say about you, what you want them to write about you on that inevitable day that when we all die. Think about what you want them to say about you, what you want them to write about you, and start working towards those accomplishments now. I'm going to give you a little hint. Nobody laying on their deathbed looks back on their life and says, "I wish I spent another couple hours at work," or "I wish I watched another movie." Those aren't the accomplishments that we're going to be most proud of. So think about it. Again, each of us and each of you has a unique path to live, but think about what you want that path to be. And read the instruction manual for life. It's in those books, and it's in the minds of these rabbis. What? Yeah, I'll take some questions. So I'm just going to leave you with a final thought. That was the subtle way of saying you've gone on for too long. As I look back, I can see clearly that decision that I made more than 2 decades ago, whether to accept that job at Goldman Sachs, was a major crossroad in my life. Had I gone left instead of right, my life would be entirely different. And I thank God every day for the clarity to make that choice wisely, because it wasn't easy. While God has certainly blessed me with financial success, even more importantly, He's blessed me with a marriage, a family, and a life that are enriched by the serenity and joy of Judaism. It's my sincere hope and prayer that each of you, in your own individual way, will find that personal connection with God and His Torah, and that connection will enrich your life as it has mine. Thank you for listening. Be happy to take some questions if people still have the patience.
What is your opinion on the...
I'm not going to answer any political questions, though.
What is your opinion on the government bond interest rate death spiral? Banks getting FDIC insurance and then going under and causing more inflation?
Yeah. I'm really not going to get too much into that. I think the fiscal cliff is actually a big problem, but if you want to talk about finance, we can talk about that separately, because I'm not sure that's that interesting to most of the room.
Do you think you're ever going to do full-time Hillel?
So I did again for about 1.5 years when I after I sold our health. I think probably yes, but I do, in terms of what I was saying to you before about trying to figure out what your unique path is, I do think that, trying to be as honest and self-reflective as I can. I do think that God blessed me with certain skills in the business world, and that I can use those skills to help the Jewish people and help the world. I mean, and so I do use those, and I find that rewarding. But I also love learning in yeshiva, so probably I think the answer is yes and yes.
Inshallah.
Yes.
How do you have multiple kids and no source of income? Like, where did the money come from?
That's a great question. So we lived off. We had some savings from from that we had saved up from some of the work that I'd done, but that was that was being depleted at a fairly rapid pace. Fresh. Exactly. So like I said, so when I was in yeshiva, I was doing, I was involved in a couple businesses at night, doing consulting, and I made some money from that. Not a huge amount of money, but it was enough to get us through. But that had ended, and now we're trying to figure out what the next thing was going to be. And during that time, how many kids did we have at that point? 5, I think. Yeah. So we lived off stage, but yeah, now. Oh my gosh! I almost forgot. My middle child's 15-year-old Ariella Khan said I have to mention her in the speech. So I have to say she's our favorite daughter. You got that on the recording?
What?
You got that on the recording?
Yeah, I did. You sent it to her and then we'll cut it out.
All right, good. Yes.
So you said before, what's the point, or what's, like, if you don't believe it's true? I've heard, I was at a yeshiva in Israel, and I asked this question to a rabbi also. He told me that there's no possible way to prove that Hashem is here because he created the world, so we can't view him physically. I just sometimes it's hard for me to stay faithful, so I was wondering if you have any insight on that.
Sure, great question. I think this is something that we all struggle with. No matter how religious we are and how long we've been religious, it's inherently, and I think what this rabbi was alluding to, is inherently almost impossible for us as finite physical beings to fully grasp the infinite. Even just the concept of infinity, just our minds as finite physical beings, we can't fully grasp that. So, but from my own personal perspective, I look at the world around me, the complexity of the world around me, and while I can't say 100%, I think the most logical conclusion, if anybody's looking at it intellectually honestly, to explain the world around us, is that God created it. Now beyond that, I told you, I alluded to a few of the stories in my personal life. I've seen and I felt God's presence in my life. And I think we all can do that if we just keep our eyes open to it. And I think there are other objective ways, and I'm sure that there's classes here at the JEC on this topic, but also looking, I think myself personally, also just looking at Jewish history and the miracle of the Jewish people. To me, study Jewish history. It's unbelievable, and I don't see any way intellectually how to explain that without God's protection of the Jewish people.
Yeah, one more, Esther.
Hi.
So, I want to add to what you were saying. My dad told me something that I was thinking the same way that you were, and my dad told me something that really shifted the way I was thinking about it. It was about how every intricate detail of the world we live in was created in a specific way to work together perfectly. The way that, trees and fruits, we can eat them and survive. It rains and it plants, and there's a whole system here. And for that to happen by chance is, the percentage of likelihood scientifically is so low. The likelihood that something created so meticulously has a creator is a lot more likely. And so even if you want to be fact-based and science-based and statistic-based, it's a lot more likely for there to be a creator than not to be one.
Right.
So that's what helps when it comes to that. My question to you is going to be when it comes to trying to balance your career or your school with having Torah involvement, what's your best advice to how you can balance both?
It's a great question, because there's not going to be, what worked for me is not necessarily going to work for you. And again, so what I would say is, I think it comes back to the point that I said before, which is you just really have to be clear about your priorities and your objectives, and what's your purpose? What is your purpose? And what is the life that you want to lead, and what are the things that you're going to need to be able to do that? And there's gonna be hard times, and you're gonna, and yeah, so one is, I would say, be clear about your purpose, and number two is embrace failure, in that you're sometimes gonna get it wrong, and that's okay. You know, and one of the biggest tools of, you know, when we say one of the biggest risks is to give up, is to feel like a failure, and you're gonna fail. I failed, everybody fails, it's part of life, and you're gonna make mistakes. Sometimes you're gonna say, oh, I really messed up, I should have done this more than that, but recognize it's a learning experience. So I would say, I wish there was an easier answer to this question, but you know, what I would say is, stay true and clear on what your goals are, and embrace the fact that you're gonna stumble sometimes, and that's okay. I'm happy to stick around if people want to.
We're gonna ask everyone to get up. We're gonna take a group picture real quick. Invite your